We had a question and answer for our college group a few weeks ago, and one of the questions we didn't get to, which was kind of off topic, but it's whatever for today, is why do some churches have women pastors and some forbid it?
Well, as to why, I don't know the reasons, all the reasons that some churches have women pastors. I can't speak to that. The reason that some churches forbid it is because it's in the Bible, basically. So there's a passage in 1 Timothy chapter 2, and it starts in, I'm going to start it in verse 8. It says, I desire therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. In like manner also that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair, gold or pearls or costly clothing, but which is proper for women professing godliness with good works. Let a woman learn in silence with all submission. And I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over man, but to be in silence. For Adam was formed first and then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. And so when Paul is laying out the roles for men and women in public worship, he's got gender-specific roles. And so with the men, he talks about the men making sure that these guys are people who will pray, and that they're going to pray without wrath, because men have a problem with wrath, and without doubting. Doubting is disputational reasoning in Greek. It's the idea of, I don't know if I believe that. It's that kind of attitude. And men have a problem with that. Yeah. So Paul addresses that. And then with the women, he talks about a couple of things. And one of them is making sure that they're dressing modestly. And obviously, again, that's painting with a broad brush, but usually you don't have to talk to guys about dressing modestly. Usually it's a situation with ladies where our culture 2,000 years ago or just today has this tendency to put a high priority on what you look like on the outside versus what you are on the inside. And lots of women react to that. And so Paul tells them, don't react to that. It needs to be a modesty thing. And then he deals with the role of women in public worship, and that's to be in not the role of leadership, but in the role of submission. It's exactly the same thing that you have in the marriage relationship. And so in Ephesians 5, Paul says that the man is like Christ in the marriage, and the woman is like the church. And the man is supposed to be treating the woman in a certain way, loving her and saving her and dying for her, and loving her in the way that Christ loves us. And the woman is to treat the husband like he's Jesus in the marriage relationship. And so, and not that he's going to be Jesus, but to just have a respect towards the husband, and the husband needs to make sure that he's loving his wife and honoring her. And when that happens, everything's good. And when it doesn't, everything's bad. And so you have the same thing in the church situation. When Paul's talking about this stuff, Paul lets us know that the woman in 1 Timothy chapter 2 is not to teach or to have authority over man. And it's the idea of exercising dominion over men in a church setting. And so that's just clear in Scripture. And he doesn't give a reason for that is cultural. He gives biblical reasons for it. And the first reason, well, actually, the reasons that he gives is because of the fall. It's the creation and the fall. And so Adam was formed first. That's why the man is to be the upfront person. And Eve was formed secondly. And so the creation there. And then secondly, he says Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. And so when you see the order in the church and you see the order in marriage, it has to do with creation and the fall. Both of them do. And so in the marriage, the reason that the husband is in the primary position or in the leadership position is because in the fall, the woman was in the leadership position. And what God did was he flipped that whole thing around and said, this is how it's going to be from now on. He also let us know that there were going to be problems. Mm-hmm. And you have the same thing in church leadership. And so that's why a church would not allow a woman to be a pastor. And so churches that allow it, I think that a lot of times it's a cultural thing where, it's the whole situation where we have in America where women are just as good as men in all kinds of areas. And this has nothing to do with quality of work. It has nothing to do with quality of intelligence. It has nothing to do with quality of emotional stability. It has nothing to do with any of that. And I would agree with anyone. There's some ladies in my life that I highly prize because of their work ethic and because of their smarts. And so I would agree with all of that. But in the church, that's not the issue. In the church, the issue is creation and the fall and how God set things up. And so,
yeah, I think you kind of answered it in your answer, but a lot of times the reasoning people have against that answer is, for example, like in 1 Corinthians 11, when it talks about head coverings, why we don't follow that, that standard, but we do follow this one. You did mention cultural versus biblical answers, but
right.
I mean, is that what it just comes down to? Is in 1 Corinthians 11, it was a cultural thing, and here in 1 Timothy, you have just a scriptural reason.
Yeah, and in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, what Zach is talking about is men praying or prophesying, having their head covered, dishonors his head, and a woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. And at the end of the whole section, what Paul says in justifying his position on this is he says, verse 14, does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it's a dishonor to him? But if a woman has long hair, it's a glory to her.
What does he mean by that? That it's a dishonor to him if he has long hair?
It's a dishonor in the sense of
like it looks ugly.
Yeah, basically.
It doesn't look good.
It's not good.
Man buns. Sorry, dudes.
Well, man buns. At least it's up on top of your head. Yeah. Yeah, that's basically what it's talking about. And it says, if a woman has long hair, it's a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. But if anyone seems to be contentious, we have no such custom.
Yeah.
Nor do the churches of God. And so he lets you know it has to do with custom. The other thing about that modern readers of their Bible don't understand is that the word for covering in the passage is a veil. It's not a doily on your head or a hat.
Right.
It's a veil. And so in this culture, a woman who went around unveiled.
Kind of like Middle Eastern cultures now, right?
Yeah, it's like Middle Eastern cultures. A woman who went around unveiled in this culture at that time was somebody who actually was prostitutes that did. And so you were unveiled up until the time that you were of marriageable age, and then you wore a veil, whether you were married or not. And that was a sign of modesty. And so basically what was happening in 1 Corinthians 11 is the women had been given freedom by Paul the Apostle, by the way. Same guy who wrote First Timothy chapter 2,
right.
Wrote Galatians, where he says there's neither male nor female, slave nor free, Jew nor Greek. And so it's in Paul's writings that women have the honor that's been given to them by the Lord, whether you're in the Old Testament or the New Testament, that was restored in this culture. And yet still there are boundaries of good behavior. And sometimes those boundaries are scriptural, and sometimes they're cultural. And so this, putting this in modern parlance would be like, literally what the ladies are doing when they did that was they're dressing like a hooker. And so, anybody can come to Calvary in anything that they want to, but don't walk in a string bikini. That's not. Don't walk in a bathing suit. Don't walk in your you're in your nightie. That's not going to be appropriate. And that's all that Paul's talking about in the passage. And so the reason that it is not something that we absolutely adhere to in this passage is because we don't do veils. If we were in the Middle East, if I was pastoring a church in Saudi Arabia, which would be hard to do because churches are outlawed in Saudi Arabia, but if I was
underground church,
if I was pastoring an underground church in Saudi Arabia, I would say, ladies, we don't want to flaunt the culture. We don't want to offend people. And so, make sure that you're not bringing the focus on what you're wearing instead of who you are. And that's basically all Paul is dealing with in the passage. So.